I find that interesting. You've got a business where you're providing a service, but you can't really say exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You have to let your potential patients kind of make their own minds up almost. You must hint subtly what it is you do for them to know.
At the end of the day, there's no substitute for speaking to someone one-to-one and finding out what, we could do questionnaires till the cows come home, but really it's about that doctor-patient relationship that you build up.
We always had this saying, like, if it burns black, send it back. Which is, you shouldn't have to say that. It should be regulated.
It's a bit like almost Uber for medical cannabis in some ways, in that if there's going to be a 5-minute delay in the Uber coming to you, it's okay because you can see it there. You can see that it's happening. That's what we tried to do in terms of that. So you can see, the prescription's been written. Okay, it's at the pharmacy. Okay, you can pay for it now. It's now on a DPD van. It's now being delivered. All those things I think are really useful changes that we've been able to make over the years to try and make the patient experience better as well.
On today's episode of the CX Insider podcast, we sit down and talk to the Research Director of Curaleaf, Simon Erridge. We discuss the story behind a business that can't say what they sell, a plant-based alternative treatment. We discuss emerging research, the future of the treatment, as well as the user experience that patients go through. Since the time of recording, Curaleaf had undergone a name change. You will hear us discuss and mention Sapphire, the clinic's old name, but what we are referring to in the episode is Curaleaf. Welcome back to the CX Insider podcast. I'm your host Octavian and I'm joined by Simon. Now I'm joined by another Simon. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and your career?
Yeah, thanks so much, Octavian. So as you said, my name's Simon. I'm a medical doctor by background. I graduated from medical school at Imperial in 2018. And very quickly after that, I sort of became involved in the medical cannabis industry. It was first of all sort of ignited through sort of an academic interest. I was doing some research at Imperial around the time the legislation changed in 2018. But what became really apparent at that time was that although the legislation had changed, people weren't going to be able to access medical cannabis without there being specialist clinics set up. And that's kind of how I then became involved with Sapphire in terms of sort of driving forward the work that we're doing there.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your actual role in Sapphire.
So the large part of my role is around driving forward the research that we're doing at Sapphire. What we have realized very early on is that there isn't the right types of research that's enabled medical cannabis to be available to people on the NHS. And whilst Sapphire isn't maybe the optimal vehicle in order to do that, we see ourselves as being one of the agents for change in order to be able to get to that position in the future. And so one of the key things that I do is research with a large database called the UK Medical Cannabis Registry. So it's something that Sapphire patients can opt into. And we have over 16,000 patients now on the UK Medical Cannabis Registry. And what we do is we assess their changes in their quality of life, specific symptoms. So for instance, the most common condition we see is people with chronic pain. So we ask them regular questionnaires as to how severe is your pain, how is it impacting your day-to-day life? And a lot of my work revolves around doing research to see what that change is. In addition to that, I also spend a lot of time going through documents, whether that be for communications on social media, newsletters, etc., to make sure that everything is medically accurate so that people are getting the right information from us.
Clearly, you're governed by a lot of regulation. Is that something that's constantly changing?
The regulations have largely stayed the same since we first started seeing patients in December 2019. There has been some sort of postulated changes to the legislation around medical cannabis, but largely the things that impact what we do on a day-to-day basis stay the same. And probably some of the biggest barriers to what we do is around how we see patients, who we're able to see, how we're able to prescribe for them, and then in the end, how they get their medical cannabis from a pharmacy.
So you've worked with them for 5 years. How do you see the next 5 years going when it comes to your treatment?
What we've seen in the UK with regards to medical cannabis is there's been a large uptake compared to where we were in 2019. We see almost exponential growth in the numbers of patients that we're seeing, both at Sapphire, and I imagine it's the same at other clinics around the UK. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more people access medical cannabis. All patients we see are those with chronic health problems who have failed to receive sufficient benefit from first-line treatments. People are struggling out there in terms of their chronic health problems. And there's a growing number of patients who are interested in our services and aren't eligible, but also those who are eligible for a prescription with medical cannabis. And so I see that we're definitely going to see an increase in the number of people being prescribed medical cannabis. That's going to be largely in the private sector as it is at the moment. I don't see that specifically changing too much in the next 5 years, because what we really need is kind of like high level data that can convince the people who make the decisions for the NHS and otherwise for it to be prescribed more widely. I think that is coming, but it requires a lot of investment. And although there is money in the cannabis industry, medical cannabis industry, it's not of the same extent as big pharma. And it's been very difficult to therefore drive forward that sort of top tier research that would allow every doctor in the UK to be on at the same consensus level around medical cannabis. At the moment, you see sort of a large dichotomy. You see some people who are heavy proponents for medical cannabis, some people who perhaps go too far and think it's a cure for all. That's not what I'm suggesting. And then you see people who are heavily anti-medical cannabis and kind of conflate the issues of medical cannabis with illicit cannabis or recreational cannabis, or indeed, this is less so amongst healthcare professionals, but in the general public, medical cannabis and CBD oil that you can get over the counter or from any wellness shop pretty much on every high street around the country. But the vast majority of doctors are kind of somewhere in that middle ground where they maybe accept that there is some evidence in petri dish models or in animal models that suggest there may be a potential there, but they aren't willing to maybe recommend it for their patients at the moment or potentially in the future. And what we want to see is to drive it forward whereby all doctors are on a consensus level by this is where medical cannabis sits within our healthcare structure and you know, these are the appropriate patients that it should be prescribed for.
So there's an interesting potential barrier then for patients that might want to use your services because they need to find an entry through potentially a doctor that agrees with what you're trying to do.
When we set up the clinics, we thought we were going to be really healthcare practitioner driven. We thought that we were going to be getting lots of referrals in sort of the traditional model. You go and see your GP, you get a referral, and then you go and see a specialist. And we do definitely see patients still through that pathway who are referred by their GP or from their specialist directly. But the vast majority has been driven by patients themselves who self-refer. And we know that there are a large number of people out there in the UK who consume illicit cannabis, but for the intent of, you know, relieving their symptoms. We did a survey in conjunction with YouGov that estimated there's about 1.8 million people in the UK who are doing that to some extent. And, you know, what we would want to see in the future is, although those people may be getting some form of relief from the symptoms, there are lots of harms with respect to illicit cannabis, not only in terms of potential societal harms, but, you know, particularly to their own health. We know that illicit cannabis can be contaminated with heavy metals, pesticides, things that you don't want to be consuming. So we see a lot of people who are sort of driven from the illicit market who are now accessing their medical cannabis legitimately.
Keeping it safe and regulated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, medical cannabis, although it's an unlicensed product, everything is regulated by the MHRA, just like any other medicine. So, you know, it has to meet minimum standards with regards to its safety. That's the most important thing, is that we make sure that we're providing a service that's safe for patients.
Regulations on this medicine are very strict, but what does this mean for the patients that need this treatment? What are the barriers for patients that are looking to access this plant medicine, as well as the benefits that these regulations bring?
Regulations are very stringent in the UK, and that has its pros and its cons. What it's there to do is to provide a safety net for patients, and that is of course the right thing. That's what it's there for. But what it does do is it does create a lot of barriers in terms of being able to either access the service, and then if you are an eligible patient, the process that you would then go on to get a prescription. So if I kind of sort of talk you through that process, if you are a patient who applies for treatment with medical cannabis, we would need to see your summary of care records from your GPs. Lots of GPs are great. They will send it next day, whatever, but some GPs may never send it. And people then have to go into their GP surgery and they're like, what's happening with my records? I'm not getting it. And so that's already a barrier initially to be able to access it. To be eligible for medical cannabis, you have to have tried, it's different a bit condition by condition, but largely you would say 2 or more sort of first line licensed therapies. So if you're someone with chronic pain, you'd expect them to have tried at least 2 types of painkillers, not ones that you get over the counter like paracetamol or ibuprofen, something you would get from your GP or a specialist. So that's another barrier, but I think that's an appropriate one. That kind of sits where medical cannabis evidence is in the UK. You can only be prescribed medical cannabis by a specialist. So if you're someone with pain, you have to see a pain specialist. There are only just over 500 pain specialists in the UK. And so if you think not all of them are within medical cannabis clinics, and, you know, that's not going to be the right thing for every pain specialist, so then they're not many to go around.
Right.
So, you know, we work with a number. There's still sort of a bit of a challenge there in terms of just recruiting clinicians, because there aren't many. For psychiatrists, it's a bit different. There's about 18,000 in the UK. That's a bit easier.
Right, yeah.
But pain specialists, it's a bit more difficult to get your hands on them. Once you see a specialist, they then have to have a discussion with other specialists in what we call a multidisciplinary team to make the final decision to be prescribed medical cannabis. And that definitely has its pros. You know, someone who is being seen for chronic pain, but maybe has a history of mental health problems, it's good to have a discussion with a psychiatrist as to, is medical cannabis appropriate? And if so, what's the best type of medical cannabis for that patient? So that makes a lot of sense, but you have to find a way of bringing those busy doctors all together once a week to have that discussion. If they then decide that that person is eligible, you have to write a physical prescription. It's not electronic, there has to be a physical prescription that has to go to what we call a specials pharmacy. So there are certain pharmacies around the UK that can handle unlicensed medicine. So this isn't Boots, this isn't something on your high street. This has to go to a specialist pharmacy that they can either send that medication directly to you, or they can send it directly to a local pharmacy. But that's a lot of barriers in the way in terms of patient access. And lots of them, I say, are right in terms of safeguarding patient safety. But I think the frustration comes from a lot of people who've come from that illicit market, who are used to being able to contact a dealer or whatever it may be and get very quick service. And we definitely do our best. But, there are rules and regulations which mean that things don't happen just like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That process is, I think a lot of what you've said, the regulations do make sense, don't they? There's a lot of good, viable checks that should be done. But yeah, like you say, when you see a patient that's coming from illicitly obtaining it instantly and then has to jump through all of these hoops, do you think the future will mean these regulations will be more relaxed?
There's been some suggestion that things will change. So, for instance, that physical prescription element, there's been some recent guidance that's been provided to the Home Office to suggest that they should change that. The government has accepted that change. So we anticipate that should come down. And I think that will make the biggest difference, actually, just that you can send something electronically rather than in a post. But, I think one of the key things is the industry has already made large strides to work within those regulations, but make them work for patients so that you can try and move things along for them at as quick a pace as possible. So patients have to be organized, but as long as they shouldn't experience any delays in being able to access their medicines or anything along those lines. It's just that you have to be, quite organized in terms of making sure that you are on time with requesting repeat prescriptions and things like that.
Right.
Today, customer experience is key, regardless of the size of your organization. Optimizing resources and time plays an essential role in meeting customer expectations. Make booking appointments easy with our customizable platform. Appointment bookings make it possible to receive all the information about your customer, user or patient, access the appointment calendar, deliver notifications to users, offer options to change or cancel an appointment, and deliver essential information to your staff through an intuitive dashboard in real time. Our appointment booking platforms collect data from every touchpoint along your customer journey, helping you deliver remarkable customer experiences. Appointment booking solutions designed for a virtual world. Click the link in our bio to find out more. How does Sapphire Medical collect and use their patients' experiences?
One of the key ways in which we do it is kind of, as I touched upon, using their specific health experiences with medical cannabis with relation to their condition. So we've published almost 20 scientific papers now since we opened in 2019, looking at all the various different conditions and how people's health has changed over that time. So we've looked at things like chronic pain, anxiety, PTSD, inflammatory bowel disease. But we pretty much looked at most of the things that we see patients for. Medical cannabis is not a panacea by any stretch of the imagination, but the results have been largely promising. But one of the key things that we also do is look at the safety as well, is look at the adverse events and report those in a robust manner. And I think that's really important. And one of the things that I think a lot of people maybe are concerned about with respect to cannabis is things like psychosis or intoxication, or in medical terminology, we call it euphoria, but you'll know it as a high from cannabis. And actually, we have seen episodes of psychosis, but actually for the patient population that we have seen, who some of them have very significant mental health problems, we don't treat people who have like schizophrenia for obvious reasons, but people with severe PTSD or severe depression, some of those will naturally go on to develop psychosis anyway. And, we have thankfully seen not very many episodes of psychosis in our population, which is really promising when we compare it to sort of people who are using illicit cannabis for recreational reasons. So that's kind of how we're using that medical data, but we're always looking to incorporate feedback in terms of how we make sure our process is always being driven forward and making things better for patients. We now have, in comparison to where we started, we have a web app where we're able to, those scores that I was talking about in terms of we're able to display those back to patients so they can see this is how my health has changed while I've been prescribed medical cannabis. They're able to request their prescriptions online through that same portal. Some of those barriers we talked about, they're able to track it the whole way through the supply chain. Even if there are delays, it's a bit like almost Uber for medical cannabis in some ways, in that if there's going to be a 5-minute delay in the Uber coming to you, it's okay because you can see it there. You can see that it's happening, something's moving.
That makes sense.
So that's what we tried to do in terms of that. So you can see, the prescription's been written. Okay, it's at the pharmacy. Okay, you can pay for it now. Okay, it's now on a DPD van. It's now being delivered. All those things I think are really useful changes that we've been able to make over the years to try and make the patient experience better as well.
It's interesting what you said as well, isn't it? Because I imagine most people's perception is that it is a panacea, isn't it? Part of the service you do is the education and the constant monitoring to make sure it is giving them the benefits of the condition they've got and not further problems.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's really important to us. And we see patients in consultations every 3 months. So we are constantly getting both those sort of questionnaire feedbacks, but also that tangible feedback, because at the end of the day, there's no substitute for speaking to someone one-to-one and finding out what, we could do questionnaires till the cows come home, but really it's about that doctor-patient relationship that you build up.
Can you dive further into the stigma surrounding your treatment?
Yeah, I think the key thing is I genuinely believe that the stigma around medical cannabis is improving all the time, and it's through doing things like this and other media opportunities by raising awareness and people being more aware of there being medical cannabis that is legal in the UK, that stigma has slowly started to change. But we do understand from speaking to our patients that they do perceive stigma, and that's from all areas of society. And one of the interesting things that we've found from doing some research with our patients is actually they perceive stigma less from their friends and family, and they felt more comfortable talking with their friends and family rather than with authority figures, let's call them that for ease. So other healthcare professionals, police, whatever it may be, they found it sort of much more comfortable speaking with friends and family about that. And that's quite interesting, but also in some ways you could perceive it as being quite worrying that they don't feel that they can trust their GP or their specialist with the fact they got a medical cannabis prescription. And we always have it as a stipulation that we will write to their GP or their specialist because they need to know what else they're being prescribed, so they can also prescribe whatever they need to prescribe safely. But I think that's an important part of the sort of education that we need to do to everyone. So that's why we've written to the National Police Chiefs Council to make sure, and offered medical cannabis education for any police force or constabulary that wants it. We've written to every GP surgery to say, if you would like a lunchtime education session on medical cannabis, I think it needs a multi-tiered approach in terms of educating the public, but also, the relevant professionals who need to really upskill their knowledge around medical cannabis.
Something that I want to talk about is the way that you guys get your emerging research out to the general population and patients, because I imagine that must be really difficult to do.
It is and it isn't. So the real challenge when speaking about our research is we're kind of limited in what we can say about it. Essentially, we are limited by what's called the Blue Guide by the MHRA, and that kind of suggests that you can't really promote your medicines, and that even comes within the context of promoting our research about the medicine. Even if the research is done with the best of intents, you can't then just transcribe it verbatim to a journalist and then let them run wild with it. We have to be very careful in terms of what we say about any positive results. But on the flip side, there's always a lot of interest with respect to medical cannabis. If I was doing the research that I did on any other drug, I'd probably been on less TV shows and my life might be simpler. But there's definitely a lot of interest just because it is cannabis, and they hear the word cannabis and it drives attention. So there's pros and cons to that, but yeah, it's certainly been an interesting time in terms of making people aware of our research, because at the end of the day, because of where medical cannabis sits, you kind of, in our healthcare system, as a patient, you need to know about it in order to be able to make the conscious decision about whether it's the right option for you. And so we believe that all patients should have that right to be able to make that option, whether it's not going to be right for everybody, but they need to be able to make that decision for themselves. So yeah, it's been a journey, but hopefully more and more people are becoming aware of it.
I find that interesting. You've got a business where you're providing a service, but you can't really say exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You have to let your potential patients kind of make their own minds up almost. You must hint subtly what it is you do for them to know.
It's really well reflected in the fact that vast majority of our patients come to us via word of mouth. And I think that's always a good reflection on any business. If you're driving things through word of mouth, it means you must be doing something right. But I think that also speaks to the fact that we have those restrictions about what we can and can't say, in that a lot of people are kind of finding out about us because of a friend or family member rather than hearing about us in X, Y, and Z.
I bet.
Can you tell us some patient experience stories that you have been a part of?
So I think some of the most rewarding experience that we've been part of, so in addition to my work at Sapphire Clinics, is I'm also a trustee of the Sapphire Medical Foundation, which is something we set up right alongside the clinics, but sits independently to it. So myself and a number of trustees who are independent to the clinics, through that process, we help to provide funding for patients who otherwise wouldn't be able to access medical cannabis. So some of the most rewarding experiences have been sort of the work we've done with individuals with epilepsy and chronic pain. We've really been able to make a difference in terms of their livelihoods, because without the foundation, there would have been no hope of them being able to access medical cannabis. So that's been definitely some of the most rewarding patients that I've got to work with, for sure.
So for this part of the episode, we've got a patient and someone that works with the CX Insider to be on the show with us. So we've brought on Daniel Gibbon, aka Dan. You might have seen him. Yeah, you might have seen him on our LinkedIn. And yeah, tell us who you are, and then we'll get started with this next segment.
My name's Daniel Gibbon. I am basically I'm the producer for the podcast. I've been a little bit behind the scenes so far. I'm actually a user of Sapphire Medical Clinics, and it's honestly it's changed my life completely. Night and day. I used to be on various other medications, and the downtime that I'd have throughout my day, personally, was just huge. I didn't feel like a functioning member of society before I tried this, basically. The level of pain relief is equivalent to that of, the other prescription medications that I was on. And before it, I'd also tried to self-medicate with cannabis. And so did my mum, actually. She it started off with, it was throat cancer. Mm-hmm. She didn't smoke, which was, there's the bad thing about it. But, which also developed into breast cancer, which very much sucked. But I was lucky enough to get her onto Sapphire Medical, which was huge benefit for her, just because of the increase in quality of life, compared to the other medications that she had. Yeah, just she went from literally the difference is night and day for her was she would go home, just watch Emmerdale, with a glass of wine, just kind of moping out, and then afterwards she would be basically laughing her ass off watching Monty Python. So that level of difference to me said it all. And I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to tell her about it. And it is really frustrating from a patient point of view that you can't take this research that you're doing and really put it out there, to the people who would benefit from it. Obviously, it's not for everyone. It's not a cure all, but for me and the other people that I've personally referred to it, it's been life changing for them, especially not having to go through the illicit route where they have so many other things that are potentially very harmful to them. It's bad because we always had this saying, if it burns black, send it back. Which is, you shouldn't have to say that. It should be regulated. Probably one of the questions that I've got for you, Simon, is what are you doing at the moment to try and educate healthcare professionals in order to get them to then be able to refer patients?
Yeah, we try and do as much as we can, to be honest. We've written to every GP practice in England. We can't get the addresses of them in the other parts of the UK, but we would do otherwise to offer them education on medical cannabis. And if you are a GP or a healthcare professional listening, I'd be more than willing to either come to a practice or do it via Zoom and give you some education around medical cannabis and what it's being prescribed for, what are the potential effects, what are the potential side effects of medical cannabis as well. Every patient that we see, their GP gets a letter about what's happened to their patient, and we hope to provide useful educational resources for that patient, for that GP. One of the key things is that obviously lots of us have electronic healthcare records now. All of us should do. Making sure that medical cannabis is correctly coded in your healthcare records. We found that a lot of patients were inappropriately, even though being prescribed medical cannabis, it was being coded as cannabis misuse or cannabis abuse or things along those lines. So, we made sure that GP surgeries were aware of the precise code that they need to put and, how to correctly code that within their system so that, I don't think it's in any way appropriate to mislabel someone who is a patient with a legitimate medical problem as an abuser or someone who's misusing a substance. So, small things like that. We try and speak at conferences and, sort of that more sort of traditional stuff that lots of healthcare professionals go to try and bridge that gap as well.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So, a question for you, Dan.
Right.
We've spoken a bit, haven't we, about people purchasing it illicitly instantly, and then they come to Sapphire clinics and obviously have to follow the regulations, which from today make perfect sense. The steps that you have to take to get what you want make perfect sense. How did you find it? Was it as you expected? Did you think it was more onerous than you thought?
To me personally, I found it easier,
Really?
just because I've moved every year and a half of my life. So I've never really had like a solid, I never had like a solid go-to guy pretty much. So having the capability of it being delivered as well, because I have like mild spina bifida, so I find walking long distances quite difficult. So the fact that it is like home delivery as well, and that it's all tracked and exactly where it is, and I couldn't think of a better system really. There was a stage in which I had to go to the post office to go pick up my delivery, just because of where I was living. Like the DPD van wouldn't drive down my street for some reason. It was a whole thing. But now that I'm living somewhere that isn't completely in the sticks, I can get home delivery, and it's like night and day. Honestly,
Does the post office ever ask you what you're coming to collect every week? And do you tell them?
That was probably one of the. I did say, because I was with my girlfriend, I was like, oh my. Arrived. Oh man, my cannabis has arrived.
Wait,
sorry, get that.
Sorry, my legally prescribed.
Yeah,
say it.
yeah. And they were just like, "What?" I was like, "Oh, don't worry, it's legal." Yeah, I have had fun with it. To be fair, I've had a couple of awkward situations in public, especially with trying to get into Download Festival was quite interesting.
Oh yeah,
because some people like to shimmy through your bag and take things and distribute them on when they're at certain festival gates. So it was kind of more of a conversation of like, I will call the police, and they're like, what? It's like, oh, cannabis, sorry. Oh man, I'm bad at this. So usage in public, obviously, like with the variation that I've got the flower form. So I've been recommended to use a vaporizer, and I've had some awkward conversations with friends that are involved in the authorities, let's put it that way, and they say you can't do that in public. What is the policy like on using it? Like, do you have to be like at home or
No, there should be no restrictions as far as I can see as to where you can consume your cannabis. It's it's a medically prescribed product. You take it as and when you need it. So if it's something you need for administered throughout the day and you're out and about when it needs to be administered, there's no reason why you should be stigmatized against to have to consume outside of the public realm.
Is it the same as smoking though? Like, does it have to be outside in a like?
I think this is where some of the regulations need to catch up. Again, this is like one of the areas where it is kind of lacking in terms of when you're vaporizing, you're not igniting it, and therefore you're the person taking the prescription is inhaling the vapor. Whereas if you were to smoke cannabis, and just to reiterate, if you even smoke a legal prescription, that is still illegal in the eyes of the Home Office. And it's something that we recommend against, because just like if you burn tobacco, you create cancer-causing chemicals and carbon monoxide and all sorts of nice things. Whereas vaporization heats up the plant so that you release the active ingredients within it, so whether it be CBD or THC or well, that's the main two, but that's how you release it. And I'll let you testify to this in terms of the aroma around using a vaporizer, and exposure to cannabis for someone who's by you is significantly reduced compared to smoking.
Yeah, 100%. My girlfriend doesn't even notice it. She's got a nose like a bloodhound, honestly. And I'll be puffing away, and she'd be like, "Oh, you are using it." It's just like like it's probably as bad as someone being, I don't know, like a block away, and you might just like catch a whiff of it on the air. It's so minimal in comparison. Yeah, to actually smoking it. it would be kind of interesting to know, like, is it technically illegal then to smoke it in a cinema, or like,
So to smoke your prescription,
to vaporize that, I mean, sorry.
no, it's definitely not technically. I think everywhere will have like it's kind of like fair usage policies. The key thing is each venue, they can't discriminate against you because you're a medical patient. If they are trying to restrict you from being able to consume your medicine when you need it in one area, they need to be able to provide you a legitimate place for you to consume it safely in another area. You are a medical patient, and therefore you have certain rights and protections that come along with that.
I've always treated it as normal vaping, you know, like nicotine vaping. So I've always treated it as, you know, like I'd need to go to, like, say, like a smoking area. You know, some people just don't like people like just generally smoking on the street, you know, like even like, yeah, like a vape. So yeah, I never knew that. That's very interesting.
I think the other key thing about like taking your medicine out and about, so you have to like, again, kind of make sure you're a bit organized with that. So you need to always keep your medicine in its original container, with the label from the pharmacy on it.
Like the big white bulky one that I've got the high, I think it's like 5 grams sort of containers.
So that some are in little pots, some are in like kind of foil packaging, but as long as it's in its original packaging with your name as it appears on your ID, because the other key thing is make sure you take around a form of ID that matches that. And then the third thing that's recommended is either a copy of your most recent clinic letter or a copy of your prescription. So this is another thing that we've done at Sapphire is people can get a copy of their prescription. So you can get a prescription replica so that you can, and that's available on your web app. So if you do ever need to prove that you're a medical cannabis patient, whether it's someone from the police stops you or whoever it may be, then you can just quickly access it on your app. As long as you're keeping your ID and your medicine is correct container, then you should be well protected.
You said that you've been like you do these educations with the authorities and things. How popular are those? Is there quite a lot of interest?
Real mixed bag. Thankfully, like in terms of like inappropriately seizing or arrest of patients is actually quite uncommon if you consider like how many patients are in the UK, but it does unfortunately happen. And that tends to be where we get our biggest pickup, is where something has gone wrong. And I think that's good. Something's gone wrong and they want more education on it, and we are there to provide it. That's a good thing. And I think police officers have a difficult job, and it's like it consumes my life. It could probably consume your life. And we did some surveys with police officers, and it's not their fault. They indicated in that survey they want more education. It's just they haven't been provided it, because policing in the country is so different from location to location. So some people it's just like providing leaflets, some people it's actually going in there, some people it's via Zoom or equivalent, and just kind of giving them some of that educational material. We can obviously drive home the stuff that we've talked about making sure you carry your prescription in the original container, your ID, and a copy of your prescription. But there's a lot of misconceptions around medical cannabis should just be an oil. So why is it not an oil? Or
because that's better.
It should look like this, or and we're able to help maybe dispel some of those sort of myths and misconceptions that potentially they may have. It's been really valuable when we've got the opportunity to do that.
Talking about education, I remember at secondary school, I had to stand up in front of my class and literally go through the reasons of what cannabis will cause and all the health risks and everything that are involved with that. I remember looking at the time, and this was when was I at secondary school? I think it was like 2009, I want to say. And I remember I came in with a poster that had the benefits of it, and I got detention. Literally, they were just like, "No, it is bad for you. It will always be bad." And I know there's been a big shift in the stigmatization of cannabis. Do you know what's currently happening in schools? Like, are they allowed to say it can be, a cure?
Secondary schools isn't really my strong suit, but I can talk about medical schools.
Okay.
So when I went to medical school, I had 2 lectures on cannabis, and it was as a drug of abuse. There was no discussion of where it may be potentially prescribed for an individual. And of course, this was at a time whereby it wasn't able to be legally prescribed, but still there was sort of no consideration of even at that time, there were preclinical studies and studies in other parts of the world that were looking at the potential benefits for some patients. And we've actually held discussions with medical schools around introducing more education around medical cannabis to the curriculum. It hasn't been super productive, I'm going to be honest with you. Again, it's kind of a bit like the policing issue. For instance, I can't prescribe medical cannabis because I'm not a consultant doctor. When you graduate from medical school, no one is a consultant doctor. And so their issue is they have so much time to cram all of the necessary things you need to be a good doctor when you come out of medical school. They're like, we can't remove, this being a bit blasé about it, but we can't remove diabetes from the curriculum to teach medical cannabis.
Yeah.
I think they're being a bit facetious when they say things like that, but I do kind of get their point. There's only like so much you can teach. But what we are seeing is there's parts of the medical school curriculum where people do have more agency around what they're able to study and things like that. So through my work at Imperial, with the medical cannabis research group there, we've had 20 plus medical students come and do research projects with us, and it maybe is on a much smaller scale than a lecture to 300, 400, 500 medical students, but I think it slowly will make people more aware, making sure they have a balanced view.
Thank you to everyone for listening. I've been Octavian and I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Let us know what you think of this episode by carrying on the conversation on LinkedIn at CX Insider Podcast. This episode is brought to you by ACF Technologies, global leaders in customer experience management solutions. Let's get into some quick fire questions. My first question to you is, have you got a favourite actor that you just love their films?
I'm going to have to say, and my wife might kill me, but Will Ferrell. I'm just like big Will Ferrell movie fan.
So you like comedy films then?
Definitely. This sounds bad as a doctor, but maybe I lack the attention span for a 3 hour. Much rather 90 minutes comedy, laughing throughout.
That's good. Have you got a favourite?
Step Brothers.
Yeah, that's a good film. That's a very good film. Do you like cold holidays or warm holidays? Do you like going to like mountainsides, or do you like going to a beach?
I would definitely say I'm more of a city person. Yeah, I much prefer sort of traditional touristy things like historic stuff, or maybe it be shopping, whatever it may be. But I'm definitely more of like a city guy. So I guess it depends on the city somewhat. Maybe like a New York in 100-degree heat probably wouldn't be like that nice. But if you went to Barcelona, you probably would want it to be quite warm.
Have you got a favourite sport that you like watching or playing?
Definitely football. Football is the one for me. Up until my 6-month-old daughter was born, I had a season ticket for Ipswich Town, who are my team. Love watching and playing football.
You're an Ipswich fan. Nice.
Yeah, and normally that would be a badge of shame, but currently they're doing very well, so I'll happily make my support public.
You were forced into supporting Ipswich, I assume, from a young age.
That's unfortunately that is how it is. So my dad is also an ardent Ipswich Town fan, and indoctrinated from an early age, and so I have a lot to thank him for.
If you're a football fan, I'll have to ask this: do you prefer Messi or Ronaldo?
A few years ago, I would have said I sort of prefer watching Ronaldo play. But I think sort of as they've come towards the tail end of their careers, I've sort of become more tired of Ronaldo's antics. Yeah. And I've definitely preferred watching Ronaldo over the course of his career play, but I think Messi is the better player.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Beckham program on Netflix?
Yeah,
it's really good.
It's very good. I mean, it's good propaganda. It's very whitewashed version, but I still enjoy it. I still enjoy it.
They don't ask the questions that I want to ask, but it's the football's good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.